Good morning. Welcome back to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. We've been talking a lot about estate planning this morning and a variety of ways of going about it as far as the 5 essential documents, the benefits of a trust. You know, one of the things when you're looking at trusts and wills and how you do things, when you're leaving money, divorce is one of those areas we get into quite a bit. And I mean, the horror stories you hear about family members that have gone through divorce, and an inheritance, this is one of those areas that if they, there are certain protections potentially where you can keep that inheritance as not a marital asset, but if you're not careful, if you're not educated, if you don't understand how the laws work on this, that inheritance that you've received could be in fact subject to being divided as well as the other marital assets. Now, how can you protect yourself? Or let's say, when we're setting up an estate plan, we're thinking in terms of protecting our children from those kind of things. And this is one of those areas, Russ, that you can't, you leave the money to your child, and the thought that they're going to get a divorce and your money that you left for that child and you want going on to your grandkids could end up going out to this now outlaw that's going to go out and maybe get remarried and maybe they even were married before and have children from a previous marriage. Who knows? But that money is now going in the wrong direction away from your family.
Yes, and whenever we ask a client what their goals are with respect to inheritance, invariably they'll say, well, I want everything to go to my children, and then when my children pass, I want it to go to my grandchildren. And in a lot of cases we've seen where children have inherited assets, and as a result of life situations that occur after the parent has passed, those assets end up going to ex-spouses, other family members, second spouses, kids that they don't even know, because they received those assets outright. And so what we suggest for clients is to make sure, that's your goal, if you want your assets to be available to your kids and then your grandkids, keeping it down the family line, then you really want it to be in trust. And you can make the child the trustee and beneficiary, and that trust separates those assets from the child's assets. So if the child does get divorced, those assets aren't considered marital assets, and those assets at the child's death will automatically go down to your grandchildren, not some other sideways event. So that's something that we've been telling clients, and they're very receptive to it because that's really what they want. Now, a lot of clients will come in and say, well, if my son receives my inheritance and they keep it in a separate account, how is that going to do? Well, there is in divorce court something called transmutation. That's when what normally would be considered a separate asset becomes a marital asset. And it's not a whole lot that has to be done for an account that's in the son's name alone to become a marital asset. Let's say, for instance, if you pay taxes on the assets, income earned on that account from joint account, there's many different ways the divorce lawyers can get at those assets. But if it's in a trust with a child as trustee and beneficiary and they keep it in the trust, then it's virtually locked up from any sort of claim such as that.
And this is one of the things, this is a great point that Russ, think of this rule then. So I've set this money aside, I'm keeping it separate. I've educated my children. They're going to keep that money separate, and yet they don't even think, right? That money generates income, and if they pay taxes from marital assets from the income generated, the tax on it, now that's now a marital asset, and there it goes as far as the division of assets go. Here's another thing with regard to that trust. So if I want to make sure it's separate, I leave it in a trust instead of in a separate account. Okay, the trust itself becomes irrevocable, meaning it can't, once they've received it, when you set it up, it's a revocable trust. You can change it, you can do whatever through your lifetime. They get that trust that becomes now irrevocable. They're able to, now it's a separate entity. They're going to have a separate tax ID number for it. It's going to be a separate standalone entity. They're in charge of it. They can take money out at will. They can they can't put money in. They can put it back in, or they can buy an asset with those money. It's like a house that they can hold in it, but they keep it separate. It files its own tax return. Okay, and you can use the money then that generated from the trust to pay the tax on that tax return, so you keep it as a separate entity. So what we're describing here means that when you set up this kind of planning, your children need to be educated a bit, right? They need to understand how this works, or at the very least, they need to know who they go talk to okay, if something happens to you? Who do I see? Well, here's this attorney that set this up for me. This is one of the persons. You want to go see Russ Cook about that. When we're doing planning, we're set up at, you know, we're the investment advisor in these, on our documents as well. So that would be another area. You need to sit down with this team that I put together that have helped me do all the good planning that I've done. You need to sit down with them and have them help you make sure that you keep those protections in place and that you maximize the value of this estate planning, that you're getting the same thing on your investments that are there in that trust, that they're doing is, you know, and this might now be changed a little bit according to the needs of the person, but basically that's the same concept, is that we've minimized risk, we've maximized return relative to risk, we've minimized taxes. We want to continue that kind of thing for that next generation. So this is a big part, and sometimes a good way to do that, in particular depending at what point in time you're doing your planning, is to have your children come in into that process up front. And do you see this a lot, Russ, with estate planning?
Yeah, usually when a client is doing estate planning, it's a good idea, if you're getting to the point where, you know, you see the end is inevitable, which we all should, to bring them in and kind of discuss with them, and they could be part of the initial meeting on how we're going to put this estate plan together. That way they're not thrown for a loop or trying to ask a whole lot of questions after you pass away. Now, I know some folks are reluctant to do that. They want to keep things close to the vest, but eventually your kids are going to know about your finances and how you want assets distributed. Yeah. So if you can have that meeting in advance, then that's fine. The only caveat is if you're going through a very volatile situation where you're kicking people out of your family and bringing them back in and kicking them out, you might have to wait until that settles before you start disclosing a lot of this information. But for the most part, if you can bring the family in and have them understand exactly what's going on, that does prove helpful after you pass away.
This is one of those areas when it comes into the, you know, your individual situation is so important, which is why we're gonna take a break. When we come back, I'm gonna get into more about an offer for you to help you get this a personalized estate plan done for yourself. But understanding how that works with regard to family, and, you know, so with your kids, if you're already having health issues and maybe the kids have been helping you with those health issues, you know, or helping you take care of things while you've been going through that, that's probably a good time to have them involved, of course. There's another part, and we're going to get into this when we come back. What if you have a child that maybe they're not so good with money? How do you maybe protect your child against themselves? There's ways to do that too. All right, but first we're going to take a break. Join us here. We'll be right back on the Retirement Report.